Today we have Kalsoom Lakhani, who is the co-founder and general partner at i2i Ventures, to support the startup ecosystem in Pakistan. And I still remember as a 17-year-old myself, when I was trying to look for, more knowledge about where to start looking for, how can I build my own startups or start getting involved in the ecosystem within Pakistan. Kalsoom's name was always right up at the top with the likes of Jahan Ara, Yusuf Hussain, because you've done a lot for Pakistan, Kalsoom. And honestly, this episode for me means a lot because I don't know if you remember, but the first time we met was actually at a conference in Peshawar. And you were delivering a session, I think, about VC funding. And I remember that you walked around the audience asking a question that, okay, so what, for example, like what would you do if you had this much amount of money? And he came to me and all I had in my head at that time was, I would just want to help people. And he said, okay, but how do you want to help people? And I did not have an answer to that. But here I am talking to you again, trying to figure out that answer because you've helped tons of people build their companies, change the ecosystem in Pakistan and create so much impact. So I would love to know more about where you started, how you started. So feel free to, I'm going to give the floor to you.
My background, sound American, but actually didn't live or move to the US until I was 18. So I was born kind of a third culture kid, was born in Dubai. My mom is from Bangladesh. My dad's from Pakistan. So lived in Dhaka for my elementary school years, and then moved to Pakistan for middle and high school, graduated and moved to the US for university, graduate school, started my career. Actually, my master's degree is in conflict resolution. So it has nothing to do with business, though I come from an entrepreneurial family. My dad's a serial entrepreneur, business family. But for me, my way of wanting to create change when I was, 20, 21 was that I wanted to do it through foreign policy, which was what I was really interested in. And obviously, to age myself, it was soon after 9/11 that I was in college when 9/11 happened. And so for me, when that happened, I thought there was a lot of responsibility as a Muslim in the US, as well as a Pakistani in the US, of what I could do. And for me, that change, I originally wanted it to come through politics. So doing my master's in conflict resolution was more focused on actual traditional conflict. What's interesting is just like the level of how much I use that skill set in my day-to-day right now, even though I'm obviously not doing traditional conflict. And so, started my career in foreign policy, ended up, hating that job, but I had a visa to work in the US, as so many of us do. And so ended up by night starting a current affairs blog on Pakistan, which was called Chup, or Changing Up Pakistan. So telling a story and a narrative of Pakistan that you weren't reading about in the news media. So doing news analysis of what was happening, but also writing about change makers and artists and filmmakers and all the really cool things that were happening on the ground. And that started to give me exposure to all the cool stuff happening back home in Pakistan, which is where my parents were just kind of back and forth. And so Pakistan was still very much home for me. And so eventually led to me starting Invest to Innovate in 2011, which was really started because as I was, I shifted day jobs, was working in venture philanthropy, but as I was meeting young people in Pakistan through my work and writing about people, realizing that they just lacked the support, even though there was so much potential, there was no support system that existed for them. And that wasn't just Pakistan, that was across a lot of markets. And that's really where my passion's always been. It's always been in kind of the unexpected, hard places to be an entrepreneur. A lot of people have asked me, like, why not focus on the US and, minorities here? And I've just always been really excited and fascinated by emerging markets. And so Invest Innovate was really born out of that idea that the next great innovators are going to come from the most unexpected places. And how do we help unleash the potential that exists there? And so Invest to Innovate was born in 2011, one of the oldest players, as you mentioned, in the startup space in Pakistan. So launched the country's first startup accelerator in 2012, have now scaled that vertical. So our team has now worked with, besides our flagship accelerator, has worked with, a couple hundred entrepreneurs through various programs that we run with players like Facebook, the World Bank, IFC. We've now trained about 50 incubators and accelerators throughout the region, because as we became good at delivering content, then we started to become that training of the trainers and helping people in other startup ecosystems as well. Built out a research arm of our work and started telling a more data-driven story about what was happening in the market. And then all that led to, what I would say about my journey is that I've fallen kind of into everything and just kind of learned as I went. And I think I just approach everything with a lot of curiosity. And so, I'm always really aware of what I don't know. So I'm always constantly learning because I feel like I'm always catching up to other people in the room. And so I obviously don't have a traditional traditional venture capital background. So I would not have put myself in the ring of being a venture capital investor. I had been running i2i at that point for about 8 years. I understood, startups really well because I'd been working hands-on with founders for so long. I understood the market really well. I'd worked closely with local angels, but I still never saw myself as an investor because I didn't have what I thought was that VC background. I don't come from finance. I don't have an MBA. But it was interesting because I had other people tell me that, you should really think about doing this because your vantage point is unique, right? And so that's really where where i2i Ventures was born from, was the desire. It was the next step of what we do. It's its own entity, and I co-founded it with my partner Misbah, who does have a more linear background from finance, even though her background itself isn't even as linear.
Mentioned this, your VC fund is the first female-led VC fund in Pakistan.
Yes, we're the only, unfortunately, the only female-led, and we're the first female-founded venture capital fund in Pakistan. So yeah, that was us, and that started the VC fund, i2i Ventures. We opened our doors in August of 2019. So my hat is now fully on i2i Ventures. We have a CEO of Invest to Innovate that runs the day-to-day there. I continue to be involved in their sister companies, so there's a lot of symbiosis between the two entities, but my full focus is on the fund with Misbah and raising the fund, but also putting out capital, supporting founders through that. So we've invested in 12 companies since August of 2019.
I think that is a lot to digest, but it's so inspiring at the same time, Kalsoom. I would love to know what were the challenges, because again, considering going back to 2011, when we did not have enough information about what VC funding actually is, startups would be skeptical, the founders who need funding would be skeptical, would they even come to invest to innovate at that time? How did you handle all these challenges as, a pioneer and also as a female in a landscape like Pakistan?
In terms of just the challenges of founders and what they go through, I think I never saw it as like, I think the thing is like when you look back on your journey, everything feels like it was meant to be that way, right? And I think I never saw anything as like, I have to take on this entire problem right now. I think I would just see things as problems as they would come up. And also I have a pretty good, my skill set is I can step back really easily and just kind of see things for what they are and be strategic about stuff. And so I think for me, I started to see the accelerator was born out of, we started first as a consulting model for founders, right? So in 2011, when we started, it was literally just me working one-on-one with founders. And number one, realize that startups can't afford to pay you. So it's not really a model that works. And number two, it's like, I would hear the same problems over and over again, right? It's like, a lot of it had to do with funding, but some of it had to do with like, how do I get customers in the door? How do I speak to this? How do I do that? How do I market myself? And so the accelerator was born out of realizing that not only was there a need to kind of do this in a larger group because everyone was facing the same problems, but also that an accelerator could actually help solve some of these issues at scale. You could actually grow this quite fast. And so that was really where the program was born from, and learning from other people, right? So I never really saw everything as like, this is the big challenge that I have to solve, because I think it would have been too overwhelming. I think I just kind of came at, and I always think about it as like, there's a big leak and you cover one hole that's leaking water and another hole pops up, and then you have to solve for that as well. And so that's what constantly happened, right? You'd work with entrepreneurs and then you're like, well, there's no funding. And so then you would be like, okay, we need to start working with local angels, and there are no local angels. How can we continue to engage, right? And Yusuf John was one of the first real angel investors in Pakistan. And so really starting to, work closely with people like him and connecting and getting investors at demo days that we would be building. So everything was just a problem that we solved. And in terms of being a woman, I don't think I ever came at it being like, I'm a woman, what do I do? I think then you're kind of always starting from a back foot situation if that's the case. I think I just showed up as I was. I think if anything, like I probably learned how to navigate probably better in some ways, because I think people underestimate you a lot as women, right? They don't even realize you're a threat when you are a threat, because they just automatically see you as who you are. And so in some ways, you use it to your advantage, right? You're just like, well, they're underestimating me and I'm just going to continue doing this work, right? And in the meantime, they're fighting with each other. Might as well just get the work done over here. I think that, if anything, sometimes it's the being young and being a woman that can be a bit hard. I think people take you less seriously. And so for me, the focus has always been at i2i. And I think that's why, mashallah, done well over the last, decade,
Mhm.
has been just about doing good work. It's like, and the good work means, do we provide value, and who do we provide value to? And for me, if founders are happy, I'm doing my job, right? And so I didn't care as much about what everyone else thought, to be honest
Mhm.
with you. I just kind of put my head down and would get the work done. And I think that actually still speaks to us as a fund now. What mattered the most is what we do after the deal, right? If we're investors that claim that we're founder friendly, but aren't actually super helpful to our founders, then we can't call ourselves that. And I think the biggest source of pride for Miss and I is that our founders are our best ambassadors now in our portfolio. They say such great things about us. And it's the reason we get into competitive deals. It's the reason why, we're able to leverage that for how we raise our money.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's what matters, right? Is like, do you provide value, and who are you providing value to? And for me, the value has always been about, do we provide value to founders and entrepreneurs? And that's what matters to me.
But then I would love to know, what sort of skills are you looking for, or what sort of a founder do you accept at i2i? Like, what exactly are you
The
looking
venture side on the
at?
fund.
Yep.
I think for me, for both of us,
Mhm.
I think the very first, because we invested pre-seed and seed, right? So
Right.
obviously we look at both the business opportunity and the
Mhm.
model, and whether it's scalable. That's obviously super important. But the very first pass is if we like the founders or not. So that it's very founder driven that early, right?
Mhm.
Because you're taking the bet on people.
Exactly.
And so I think the traits that, a lot of times VCs mirror, like they look for people that match their values.
Mhm.
For us, what really matters is a sense of hunger and curiosity. Like, are they actually going to learn constantly, right? Because it
Right.
is an uphill battle for what they're building. They need to have humility and know what they don't know.
Mhm.
And that's something that I think across the board, all of our founders have. They're constantly, some of the hungriest, most, interested people that I've ever met have been the founders in our portfolio. Like, I'm learning so much from them constantly. So I would say that those would be some of the biggest traits.
Mhm.
Do they have grit, which grit is the confluence of passion and determination, right? That Angela Duckworth talks about. And grit to me is something that is, you can't teach that. You either have the hunger or you don't,
Mhm.
right? So those are things that we look for when we're investing in founders. And I would say that, when we look at our entire portfolio, that's across the board with all of them. We've obviously invested in some of the X-Cream guys and whatever, but what I would say about all of those guys is they've had the experience of working in very operationally intensive places. They know how to solve problems,
Mhm.
and they know how to solve problems quickly. And so
Right.
I would say that, problem solving is a very big part of building a business. So that's what we look for.
Awesome. And you also mentioned earlier on about conflict resolution. And I think it's
Mm,
such an important skill that sometimes not even spoken about. But
mm.
do you want to talk more about that? Like, how were you, again, you studied it as a field of your, like, in your degree, but now you've also applying that in your current role, talking to people day in, day out. And obviously the way you resolve conflicts in Pakistan, the way you can negotiate and the way you communicate is going to be very different from how you negotiate with people outside, because again, cultural differences also come into play. So how do you like put that skill into practice today?
Conflict resolution as a field is like, it's talking about conflicts in the world, right? But I think at the end of the day, like when you think about what the skill set is when it comes to negotiations, when it comes to how conflicts are resolved, I think the major thing is your ability to, there's always a subtext to what everyone's saying, right? So whatever brings someone to the table, there's something that's driving their
Mhm.
desire to be there, their intentions behind it, their objectives. And oftentimes what they're saying is not what's actually their intention. So I think conflict resolution for me, or at least like how I leverage it as a skill set, is the ability to read the subtitles, right? And to actually say like, okay, I probably use it the most in negotiations with founders,
Mhm.
because oftentimes like communication breaks down in negotiation, right? Because you have lawyers involved, you have contracts, not contracts, but like term sheets,
Mhm.
and you're signing stuff, and you're going back and forth and haggling over valuations and what it means, right? And so I think it's the ability to kind of step back and say like, actually, we think this person's being difficult, but what's driving them is like a fear around letting go of too much, right? Or whenever I'm dealing with that, even with founders and how they're dealing with problems in their companies, or if there's co-founder issues, like I think I've always had that mindset. Like I've always been that person that's been able to resolve problems my whole life. And so, or be with between people. And so conflict resolution was just a path that I chose academically, but I think I continue to use it a lot because I think I'm relatively good at reading the subtext of a room and be able to say like, okay, what's happening here feels like not actually what's being said right now. And so how do we actually get people to be more honest about it, or how do we get to the heart of the problem? And so that's really where I think most of my skill set comes in.
Awesome. And also would love to know more about how your mindset has changed over the years, because the series is more about, talking to people who have made it in their industries, but now I really want to take them through the journey of where they started and how they started. So for you, like let's say in the past decade, where was Kalsoom before and where do you stand now? And what exactly were the main, challenges that you had to go through, or the milestones that you've achieved to become the woman that you are today?
Yeah. And I wouldn't say that I've made it at all, right?
It depends on how you see it.
Yeah, I have a long way to go. I'm 39 now. I was 28, I think, when I started Invest and Innovate. So I was relatively not that young, but I was in my 20s. And I just think there was I had a lot of naive, in some ways it was good being naive coming into it, right? Because you had to be audacious enough to believe that you could do something like that.
Yep.
I think the me back then was that I was just, I don't think I had full confidence. I hadn't fully stepped into my power, right? And so I didn't realize all the things that I know now, which I mean, I've done a lot of work on emotional intelligence work and leadership work since then. And so it's really helped me become not only a better leader, just a better individual also. And so I think that the difference would have been that I had all of the same things, like same traits, everything. I just hadn't fully leaned into it yet. And so for me now, I started to realize what I was good at and also what I was bad at, right? You have to have a lot of honesty and awareness of yourself. And so I think, a few things that I've been thinking about for myself is that I actually have very, very good instincts. I just didn't trust myself enough when I was younger. So I would oftentimes give that onus to someone else, like an advisor, when actually I knew the answer. And every time I have not listened to myself, something's messed up. And so I think over time, I've built confidence in my gut. Like if I have like a little voice in my head, I always now know, like, listen to the voice like this. And I think there's one of my favorite TED Talks recently that I've listened to. Our CEO Mevish on Invest Innovate sent it to me, and it's basically about how it's about nonviolent communication and basically how we become animals. It's like she relates it to animals and how they respond to things. And so you can be the jackal, which basically attacks constantly, or you can be on the other side of the spectrum as the giraffe, which has a bird's eye view, but also responds with empathy. And so we're all constant works in progress, but I do think from a leadership standpoint, I've become a lot better, or I try and I aspire to be a giraffe constantly, of just being like, okay, step back, think more, listen more. I think don't be arrogant about stuff, right? You don't know the answer. So those are things that I think I'm still continuing to learn, which is why I don't believe I've made it yet, but I think that, those are the things that I pay the most attention to. I do think that who I am at 39 today is the same person in a lot of ways, but also dramatically different. I think I'm just generally a lot more confident and just more comfortable in my own skin.
I love that you positioned yourself as a giraffe while you're leading a pack of unicorns. I love that.
I don't know if they're unicorns or whether or not we should have unicorns, right? But generally, if maybe it's a pack of zebras instead. But yeah, I do think that like giraffes as an animal are kind of amazing. And so cool. It's a cool animal to try to be.
I love that. But yeah, Kalsoom, considering the time as well, I will not be, taking too much of yours. I would love to know, what's your advice to people in their 20s, starting off, let's say people who've graduated, looking for jobs, or someone who might have just lost their job as well, considering the circumstances that we're in right now. Somebody who wants to start their own startup or wants to become a VC in the future, feel free to, just share basically everything that you've got. So,
sure, of course.
Yeah.
I think the thing is, like, there seems to be a lot of people feel like there's a pressure to know everything today. And right, like we're always going to be learning. My biggest piece of advice: say yes to everything. Every opportunity, even if it's a fun opportunity, say yes to it. Like, because it's going to open up a door, or going to open up like a piece of your brain that you didn't know existed that'll lead to something else, right? Come at everything with curiosity. So like when I was first starting my journey with Invest and Innovate, I would just message people coldly and just be like, hey, could I take you for coffee? I would just love to learn more from you, right? And there's no agenda. I didn't have anything except buying them a cup of coffee. Those became some of my biggest, earliest supporters, including one person, shout out to Shuja, who's now one of our investors in the fund, right? And I joke that he was my longest sales cycle. I took him 9 years before he became an investor in us. But those are the relationships that you build. And I think you don't have to have the answers today. You don't have to know what you're going to do for the rest of your life at 21, 22 years old, right? Yes, like a became a VC at 35. And so, you know, and I'm probably going to do something else in my career at like, you know, 49. So we are constantly works in progress. We are constantly reinventing ourselves. I think the only thing you can continue to do is just be curious and hungry. And I think a lot of privilege oftentimes is baked into the ability to do that. So I think it's also important to say that if you don't have the means to start a business today, it's okay. Like you can try stuff on the side. You can go work for a startup and learn, just like what you're doing right now. It's like go work and learn from someone for a little while, right? And then come back and figure out what you want to do next. And so you don't have to know everything on day one is basically the first thing.
Last question. I'm just going to be having like whatever comes first to your mind was I say the following things. What is something that people in their 20s should invest their time in?
Yourself. Travel.
Their money?
Money. I mean, some people like to save or investing that money into something that will earn money over time. So maybe put 10% towards crypto, but like don't put all your money in crypto. So yeah, put stuff in things that are going to also earn you things over time.
I'm an advocate for that as well. So good one. And what should they invest their energy in?
Honestly, yourself. Put yourself first and say like, you know, whether that means like, you know, doing something close by, whether that means like, you know, taking a course online. I feel like travel, if you have the ability and the privilege to do it, is like one of the best things you can do for yourself. I think it's the most beautiful thing is when we go out in the world totally curious and just learning from other people in other places. Best thing you can put your energy into is making yourself uncomfortable as much part of the day as you can.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kalsoom, for this.
No worries.
It's been a pleasure talking to you. And I'm so glad that I finally had a chance to talk to you after a couple of years.
It's been so long. I'm so proud of where you are today.
Thank you so much. You continue to inspire all of us. And also, I love that sweatshirt. So feel free to give a shout out to your friend as well.
Oh, yeah. This is my friend Sajani's company, Cola Goodies. They do superfood drinks from Sri Lanka. So shout out to her. She's awesome.
Thanks a lot.
Okay. Talk soon. Bye.